A man who could buy anything in the world with just one word. But the only thing he wanted was something his money could never touch. Respect, sincerity, and love. That was not bought, but freely given. Now picture this. He met a woman who didn't blink at his wealth, who didn't chase his lifestyle, who didn't bow to his power. Instead, she turned away when he offered gold, and she smiled when he brought nothing but silence. Would he still choose her, even though every other person around him only valued his riches? Or would he walk away, realizing she was too different from the world he knew? At first he thought it was pride. Maybe she was pretending. Maybe she was testing him. Maybe it was just another game. But as days turned into weeks, he noticed something. She never asked where he went, never questioned how much he owned, never leaned toward him when the world whispered about his fortune. Instead, she asked him the kind of questions no one dared. How do you feel when the room grows silent? Do you ever wake in the night and wonder if all of this has meaning? When was the last time someone hugged you without expecting something back? Each word struck him deeper than jewels ever could. He realized slowly, painfully, that she saw the man, not the title, not the wealth, not the palace behind him. And this unsettled him more than anything he had faced in his life. Because here's the twist. He was used to winning battles, breaking records, commanding respect. But how do you win against someone who doesn't want what you're offering? How do you impress someone who is not impressed by the things everyone else craves? The first time he brought her into a room filled with diamonds and silks, she simply looked around and said, "Pretty things, but they don't last." When he offered her a gift that others would have fallen to their knees for, she gently returned it and said, "I don't need this to know what kind of man you are." And when he tried to test her by pulling away, waiting for her to chase, she didn't move. She let him go, calmly, as if her worth didn't depend on his presence. This shook him because in her silence, he saw truth. In her distance, he saw dignity, and in her refusal to bow to gold, he found the very thing his heart had been starving for all along. But here's where curiosity deepens. Would he truly risk everything for a woman who could not be bought? Could he walk away from the expectations of a world that demanded his match be chosen for status and wealth? Or would his heart finally speak louder than tradition, louder than money, louder than power itself? Every encounter with her became a mirror. She reminded him he was more than his crown, more than his fortune, more than the shadows of a palace. She stripped away the layers the world had built around him, and what remained was a man, vulnerable, uncertain, but alive in ways he had long forgotten. And so the question lingers. Will he let go of everything that defined him to hold on to the one thing that defied him? Underneath the weight of his world, he had always believed money could open every door. But with her, every door he pushed remained closed, unless he walked through as just a man. No title, no power, no luxury to hide behind. And that shook him in ways nothing else ever had. He started watching her when she didn't know he was there. She laughed with children who had nothing, as if their laughter was gold itself. She helped strangers without announcing it, without waiting for thanks, as if kindness was simply her nature. He noticed how her eyes never changed, whether she was standing in a crowded market or a marble hall. She was the same person, steady and true. That constancy haunted him, because he realized he didn't even know if he himself could remain the same without his wealth. What if she saw through him completely? What if the man beneath all of this wasn't enough? The thought terrified him more than losing any fortune ever could. One evening, he tried again. He told her, "I can give you comfort, security, anything you'll ever need." She paused, looked straight into him, and asked softly, "And what will you give me when storms come that money cannot stop? What will you give me when all that's left is silence between us?" He had no answer. He had won countless debates, handled endless challenges, but this question cut deeper than any sword. From that moment, he stopped bringing gifts, stopped trying to impress with grand gestures. Instead, he began offering something that scared him, his honesty. He spoke of nights where loneliness felt heavier than stone. He admitted fears he never voiced to anyone. He shared the truth that sometimes, behind all the wealth, he felt invisible. And instead of judging, she listened. She didn't solve, she didn't flatter, she simply understood. That understanding became his undoing, because he had always believed love came dressed in diamonds. Yet here it was, arriving quietly in a moment of vulnerability. But again, could he choose her without shattering expectations of everyone watching him? Could he defy a world that demanded appearances over authenticity? Would his courage stretch far enough to protect this fragile truth he had found with her? The more he stayed near her, the clearer it became. Money could build walls, but her wisdom tore them down. His fortune had bought loyalty, but her silence brought peace. And though she had nothing to offer him but herself, that nothing was the everything he had been searching for his entire life. Still, one question kept burning in his heart. If he gave up the weight of all that defined him, if he stood before her, stripped of wealth and status, would she still choose him, not as a ruler, not as a rich man, but simply as a man who finally found where he belonged? He found himself waking each morning with a restlessness he could not shake. A man who had lived his whole life surrounded by certainty. Certainty of power, certainty of wealth, certainty of control, now stood on unsteady ground because of one woman who cared nothing for the world he ruled. And strangely, he didn't want to escape it. He wanted to stay in that storm, because in that uncertainty he finally felt something real. Every time he saw her, his world slowed. The sound of her voice became louder than the noise of the crowds. The way she walked, graceful without trying, made him forget the weight on his shoulders. And the way she looked at him, not at what he wore, not at the luxury around him, but at him, it left him exposed in a way he had never known. One night, he invited her to walk with him under the stars. No guards, no grand setting, no distractions, just the sky stretched wide above them, endless and quiet. He thought perhaps, without riches surrounding him, she might see him differently. But she didn't. She treated him the same, her words steady, her heart calm. And in that moment, he realized she wasn't blind to his wealth. She simply refused to let it blind her to the man he was. Could he really trust this? Could he believe that someone existed who didn't measure him by the weight of gold or the reach of his power? What if he risked everything for her, only to discover she too would eventually see him as the world did? That fear gnawed at him, but so did the thought of walking away. He tried once more to test her, though now it was not with gifts, but with truth. He told her of his darkest doubts, of the nights he felt trapped in the very life everyone else envied. He admitted that sometimes the applause he received sounded hollow, and the crowns he wore felt heavier than chains. He confessed that there were moments when he longed not to be admired, but simply to be loved, without question, without reason, without condition. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She placed her hand gently on his arm and whispered, "Then stop trying to be everything for everyone else, and just be yourself with me." Those words shattered him, because no one had ever spoken to him that way. No one had dared to strip away the image and demand the man beneath. And in that moment, he knew she was different, not because she ignored his money, but because she reached for the soul buried beneath it. The world around them would not make this easy. Rumors would rise, voices would question, traditions would resist. Could he bear the weight of all those battles for the sake of one woman who never asked him for anything in return? Could he endure the whispers of betrayal from those who saw her as unworthy, simply because she had nothing to offer but herself? He began noticing something changing inside him. He no longer found satisfaction in the endless luxuries that once defined his life. The grand halls felt empty. The feasts tasted bland. The gifts piled high in his chambers felt meaningless. But a single smile from her lit up more of his heart than all the jewels ever could. It was then he realized he wasn't just drawn to her. He was dependent on her presence, her voice, her wisdom. She became the mirror that reflected his truest self. And though that self was scarred and uncertain, it was finally real. The thought began to haunt him every night. If he let her slip away, if he bowed to the world's expectations instead of his own heart, he would spend the rest of his life drowning in riches but starving for love. And so the question grew louder with each passing day. Not whether she would accept him, but whether he would be brave enough to stand against everything for the chance to keep her. Would he finally take the leap, risk his world, and tell her the truth he had never dared speak before? The weight of choice pressed on him heavier than any crown he had ever worn. He walked through endless halls, surrounded by walls of gold and ceilings painted with history, yet all he could think of was her voice. Calm, steady, simple. The world expected him to move like a ruler, decisive and strong. But here he was, a man paralyzed by the fear of losing the only person who made him feel human again. He began to notice how her presence lingered even when she wasn't near. The way she folded her hands when she spoke. The way her laughter broke through silence. The way her words carried wisdom that cut deeper than any polished speech. He replayed them in his mind at night, lying awake in chambers that felt colder without her. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of battles, but of silence. Silence that might come if she ever turned away from him. Imagine a man with every key in the world, but the only door he wants to open may never belong to him. What if her heart, pure and steady, refused him not out of pride, but because she believed he deserved someone who could match his world? That thought tormented him. One day, he tested his own courage. He stripped away all signs of his wealth. No robes, no carriages, no guards trailing behind. He came to her as any man would, with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a heart beating too fast for comfort. She welcomed him without surprise, as though she had been waiting. They walked along a quiet path, where no one could see them, and for the first time he spoke without the armor of his title. "I don't know how to be the man you see in me," he admitted softly. "I've been taught to lead, to conquer, to provide, but not to love without condition, not to give without control, not to stand before someone as only myself." His voice cracked, and that crack terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. She stopped walking, turned to him, and with eyes that saw too much, she said, "Then let go. Stop holding so tightly to the man you were taught to be. I don't need him. I just need you." Her words broke something inside him, and in that breaking he felt free. For years he had hidden behind strength, because the world demanded it. But here was a woman asking for his weakness and offering hers in return. It was a kind of exchange he had never known, one no wealth could buy. But once again, could he protect this fragile truth against the storm that would come if he chose her openly? Already whispers surrounded them, advisors warning him of damage, allies questioning her worth, eyes watching every move. They would say she was too simple, too unfit, too small for the life that awaited her. And though she didn't care, He knew the storm would fall hardest on her. That thought nearly broke him. To love her was to place her in the path of fire, yet to leave her was to betray the very reason he had finally learned what love truly meant. He found himself praying, not to win, not to conquer, but to find strength in surrender, to have courage not for himself, but for her, to fight not for power, but for the right to stand beside the one person who refused to be bought. Every moment with her became sharper, the brush of her hand when it met his, the light in her eyes, when she spoke of simple joys, the way her silence often spoke louder than words. He realized these small things meant more than all the treasures ever gathered, and yet he still hadn't asked her the question, burning on his tongue. Would she let him try? Would she allow him, with all his flaws, all his doubts, and all his fears, to walk beside her not as a ruler, but as a man who had finally found the love he thought could never exist? And with every heartbeat, the answer became clearer in his chest. He could live without wealth, he could live without glory, but he could not live without her. His chest felt heavy with the words he had never spoken. Every time he looked at her, they rose up, pressing against his throat, begging to be set free. But fear held him captive, not the kind of fear he had known before, not fear of defeat or loss of power, but the raw, trembling fear of being vulnerable to someone who could shatter him with a single word. He had faced storms, wars, endless expectations, but nothing compared to the storm in his heart, when he thought, what if she doesn't want me the way I want her? What if, in all her wisdom, she saw something in him unworthy of her love? That question haunted him more than any enemy ever had. One night, unable to carry the weight in silence any longer, he walked to where she often sat, a quiet place, far from the noise of the world. The stars scattered above like witnesses, the wind carrying the scent of earth and night, and there she was, simple, calm, unbothered by everything he thought mattered. He sat beside her, not as a man of wealth, but as a soul stripped bare. For a while he said nothing, just listened to the sound of her breath, steady and grounding. Then, with a voice unsteady, he whispered, "Do you know what you've done to me?" She looked at him, puzzled but patient, waiting. "You've made me question everything I thought I was," he continued. "You've made me feel weak in ways I didn't know I could shade. And yet, in that weakness, I felt stronger than ever. Stronger because I'm no longer hiding behind what I own. I'm finally daring to be just myself." Her silence was not rejection. It was deeper than that. It was an invitation for him to go on. What if this was the moment? The one chance to open his heart completely. Would she understand the depth of what he was about to confess? Or would she quietly step back, leaving him shattered, in a way no enemy had ever managed? He leaned closer, his words trembling as they fell. "I've lived my life believing that money, status, and power could hold people close. But with you, I've learned that nothing matters unless the heart is safe. And I've never wanted to protect someone's heart the way I want to protect yours. Darling, all I want is to take care of you. Let me prove it." Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, he saw something flicker in them. A light he had been desperate to find. But still, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked gently, "And what if you fail? What if caring for me isn't as easy as you imagine?" He breathed deeply, steadying his voice. "Then I will try again and again until I learn every way to love you right. Because for the first time in my life, failure doesn't scare me. Losing you does." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that felt like dawn breaking after years of darkness. But the tension didn't end. because love wasn't just about promises whispered under stars. He knew tomorrow the world would test him. Doubt would whisper, voices would condemn, and traditions would fight to pull them apart. Yet as he sat there beside her, the weight of choice still heavy but no longer unbearable, he realized something. He was ready to carry that weight, not because it was easy, but because she was worth every battle that would follow. Still, one question loomed larger than the night sky above them. Would she truly believe him enough to let him in? Or would her wisdom once again hold him at a distance, leaving him yearning for a love he could almost touch but never fully hold? And in that fragile silence, his heart waited for the answer that could change his life forever. The night was quiet, but the air between them carried unspoken words that neither had the courage to release just yet. He sat near the edge of the garden wall, watching the stars scatter their glow across the dark canvas above, while she stood a few steps away, hands folded as if steadying herself. It had been days of testing moments, countless trials of patience, and endless conversations where her refusal to be impressed by his wealth left him both frustrated and deeply intrigued. He had met many people before, people who smiled too quickly, who said yes too easily, and who bent their will at the faintest sight of his influence. But she was unlike them. Her silence spoke louder than flattery, and her presence often left him questioning himself. That night, as the wind brushed softly against the trees, he turned his head toward her. "Why do you always hold back?" he asked, his voice calm, yet heavy with a quiet ache. She paused before answering, as though each word needed to be carefully chosen. "Because I want to know the man behind what the world sees," she said softly. "I don't need gifts or promises tied to fortune. I want to know who you are, when everything else is stripped away." Her tone was not harsh, it was gentle, but it cut deeper than any accusation. For a moment he could not respond. The truth was, he wasn't sure how to separate himself from the world that had shaped him. He wondered if she even understood what she was asking, to see him without the shields of luxury, without the aura that so many admired. But her eyes never wavered. They held him steady, as if daring him to reveal what he had long hidden from everyone else. "Do you think," he finally said after a long pause, "that you'd still want to stand beside me if I was no one, if I had nothing?" His words carried vulnerability.